Nobody can really call you an extremist in any way or like some crazy person if you've just offered to get coffee with them, basically. And yet I got all these text messages from all these people that I didn't know with really curious, open-minded questions. Nobody said anything hateful. I remember one question was, what's the best solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And I was like, wow, I don't know the answer to that question, but maybe there's a need for some sort of hotline where people can ask questions and get responses, and that they'll get a response from a range of perspectives. That's kind of my nature in general. And so it was the idea that I had for this hotline, that we could have folks staffing a hotline who, when they get a question, they share a range of perspectives and let the user come to their own conclusion.
Shira Hoffer, welcome to Heterodox Out Loud.
Thanks for having me.
I think the last time you and I spoke, we were in a large ballroom at the HXA conference in Chicago. Is that right?
That's right.
And now I believe you're in your dorm room at Harvard.
Yeah, welcome.
And I'm here in New York. So I'm so happy to have you on the show today. You're the founder of this really interesting growing student organization called the Institute for Multipartisan Education. And I'm really eager to have you talk with our listeners about what you and your fellow students have been doing with that organization. Well, let's just begin as I normally begin with my guests and just say a bit about you. So you're a senior at Harvard. You're majoring in social studies
and religion in a joint.
So it's a double major?
It's a joint major. So you fulfill 75% of the requirements of each. And then you write a thesis at the intersection of the two.
Interesting. Tell us a little bit about your experience at Harvard. What was it like when you arrived? You were there obviously through the tumult of last year, which we'll be talking about, of course. But what was your experience over your first couple of years at Harvard?
I think I came into Harvard very idealistic about the pluralism of a college campus. So coming from Gann Academy, a school which really prizes and speaks about pluralism every day, I was like, Harvard is going to be Gann on steroids. There's going to be all these people from different backgrounds, and everybody's goal is going to be to engage across differences really productively and learn all about each other. And I think that would be awesome. I don't think it's the reality right now. I also don't think that's unique to Harvard. I think that's kind of a national trend. But I came in kind of seeking out as many opportunities to engage across differences as I could. I joined the Interfaith Forum. I did a project or a program through the Ethics Center called the Intercollegiate Civil Disagreement Program.
Is that the Safra Center?
Yeah, the Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard.
Right.
And just looked for ways to expose myself to viewpoints that going to a Jewish day school I wasn't exposed to as much, and found that was more challenging than expected. There was a notable moment. I was in a class my freshman year where I asked a question about what was on the board, and the professor said, "Oh, we don't ask questions like that in this class."
Was it a math class or a biology class? What kind of class was that?
It was a class about race and ethnicity in the US. And we were discussing how to dismantle the university system. And I, freshman, was a little confused about why we were dismantling it in the first place. And I asked, just innocently, sorry, could we take one step back and understand why we're dismantling it? And everybody just looked at me. And I was like, uh-oh. And we kind of moved on. And after class, I went up to the professor. I said, I'm really sorry if I offended somebody, but I'm still confused why we're doing this. And she said, yeah, we don't ask questions like that in this class because in other classes, a lot of students experience racism and homophobia, and we want this classroom to be a safe space. And I was so baffled as to how that related to the question and kind of what was going on. And I was like, I touched a nerve. I'm going to just take a step back. I'm just a freshman. But that had a big impact on me. It didn't happen again. And I don't think that that's representative of most professors at Harvard. But it was interesting. And it kind of got me thinking about speech and academic freedom and learning and what is safe spaces and controversy. So happy to chat more about all that.
And you also have roots, biographical roots, I think, in conflict resolution. You were involved in small claims court. Can you just share a bit about that experience?
Yeah, I think it traces back to when I was like 11. We used to have family meetings around a bowl of M&Ms, and we would discuss conflicts that came up in the family very productively. And my
Really? Actually,
brother,
with actual M&Ms?
oh, actual M&Ms, definitely. That was the
Wow.
draw. I was 11 years old. But my brother came one time to a family meeting. He was 7, and he had a list of like 15 things that he didn't like about me. And he presented that list at the family meeting.
Only 15.
I know. I was disappointed. And some of them were like, I don't like the way that Shira laughs, which my parents kind of explained to him. That's not something we can change. And then some of them were like, I don't like that Shira punches me in the hallway every time she sees me in the house. And then it was, Shira, maybe you shouldn't be punching your brother when you're walking through the house. And this kind of, it's a funny example, but this method of like talking things out and understanding where we can change and where we can't has been kind of a thread throughout my life that I think I've carried, and became really interested in broader conflict resolution in college. My sophomore year, I trained with the Harvard Mediation program at Harvard Law School to be a mediator in Massachusetts small claims court. So people come to court, they have a dispute, and for free, they can come and chat with us mediators and try and come to some sort of mutually agreeable resolution to their case. And if not, they go back to court. But it's a really neat way to put these skills into practice.
And in that role, you learned about the distinction between interests and positions.
Yeah,
which I've heard you talk about.
Important distinction.
Can you just say a bit about that distinction and how you understand it?
Yeah, the idea is like a position is something that you hold. Like I am opposed to gun regulations in the US is an example of a position, or I am pro-choice is a position. An interest is kind of what underlies that position. So I'm in favor of no gun restrictions because I believe in safety, and I was once robbed and my family needed to be protected and I want to protect them more. Or I'm pro-choice because I believe in women's health access and I believe that abortion is a human right. There's all of these like reasons and identities and stories behind what people want. And in small claims court, it's like my position is, you owe me $5,000 and my interest is I don't have $5,000 because you hit my car and I needed to repair it. But in broader society, it's like such an expansive notion that I think is so helpful in engagement across differences, because those positions against each other feel intractable. But once we can understand the interests behind them, both, they're an ends in and of themselves that we gain understanding about each other as people, and they can also facilitate consensus building in a way where maybe we thought it was previously impossible.
Great. And an example that I've heard you use and I've heard elsewhere too, or making that distinction, is like there are two people who both want a package of eggs, a dozen eggs.
Right.
And do you want to take us through it?
Sure.
Just give it a roll if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's like there's a carton of eggs, right, in the fridge, and there are twins. And one walks into the kitchen to take the eggs, and the other one says, no, I want the eggs. And it goes back and forth. I want them. No, I want them, etc. And so it seems like they're just going to have to split the eggs equally, and both of them are kind of unhappy. And then one of them goes, wait a minute, what are you going to do with 6 eggs anyway? And the person goes, what do you mean 6 eggs? I just want the carton. I'm like building a craft project with my cousin. Why do you want 6 eggs? And the person's like, no, I want 12 eggs because I'm making a big batch of meringues for this wedding shower. And suddenly they realize you just take the eggs out of the box. You can split it in a way that makes both people equally happy. Now, that's a very like consensus building model of interests and positions. It's a model that we use in mediation when the goal is for them to come to some sort of mutually agreeable decision. But I think we don't even have to get as far as how to split the eggs. There's just that value too in understanding, why are we doing what we do? Why do we believe what we believe? I think has intrinsic value as well.
Good. So it's in that case, I like that example because it sort of makes clear that distinction between the interests and the positions.
Yeah.
And what it also, it sort of, it opens the doorway to the possibility that when we see stark conflict in position at the position level, there could be a way to move in there and do nuance to start thinking more about the reasons why. Right. Which is, in many ways, it's close to what we talk about being good at universities, ideally at least, that we're good at making things more complicated, but also examining nuances, exploring the possibilities, which will be connected to curiosity, as we'll probably see soon. So you had that experience working in mediation. Can you just talk a bit about your experience last year? You were on campus at Harvard when a lot of stuff at Harvard was at the epicenter of a lot of the controversies. I'm just really especially interested in a hotline that you were involved in creating. Can you just tell us a bit about the hotline if you want to start there, or just talk about your experience last year with the upsets on campus?
Sure. So I practice Judaism pretty traditionally. When Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, I was in synagogue. I was not online. I had turned off my phone for the duration of the holiday. And it was the strangest experience, John, because in the morning I walked into synagogue and somebody said there was a terrorist attack in Israel. And I kind of like brushed it off because, maybe somebody stabbed somebody at a checkpoint. It happens all the time. Like, it's terrible. And it didn't really like raise any red flags in my head. And then a couple hours later, somebody was like, oh, I think like 200 people were killed in the attack. And then I was a little more on heightened awareness. And it took all day for those of us who were offline to actually get a sense of what had happened. And it was so different than learning news in any other way because we're so used to like instantly refreshing, whatever news source we use to learn. So it was this kind of elongated period of like confusion and grief. And we were all within this bubble of the holiday, a holiday where we're supposed to be celebrating joy and the continuity of Jewish learning and Jewish people. So it was a really paradoxical time, very emotionally tumultuous. And inside of Hillel, people, started saying things about Palestinians that I thought were somewhat inappropriate. I think out of grief, out of fear, it was day one, but still things that I was like, whoa, guys, we can't be saying things like that. And then on October 8th or 9th, I don't remember, you probably saw this statement came out signed by 55 student organizations at Harvard that blamed Israel in its entirety for the attacks of October 7th. Suddenly I was like, whiplash to the other side, like, wait a minute, guys, same thing, we can't be saying that. It doesn't make any sense. What do you mean by blaming Israel for it? It was an attack on their people. Kind of, where is the nuance as you're talking about? And it felt like neither side was engaging with each other at all. It was like everybody kind of became magnets to the polar opposite sides, and there was no engagement in the middle. And President Claudine Gay was sending out a series of statements around the conflict, and one in particular that she posted on the president's website, but that didn't go out in a massive email to the student body. I'm not sure why. Clarified that Harvard's stance is that Hamas is a terrorist organization. And so some of my Jewish friends informally wanted to send that message out to the student body and asked me to send it to my dorm listserv. And I was like, okay, I can be a messenger. I can send this along, but it's October 9th, guys. Like, people are going to jump on me for all sorts of things. And so I ended up writing this email where I said, hi, everyone, here's a message from President Gay. And by the way, my background is in mediation. I happen to know a lot about this conflict, and it's really freaking complicated. Here's my cell phone number. If anyone wants to have a non-judgmental conversation, I'd be very happy to chat. And I figured nobody can get that mad at me if I've offered my cell phone number and a non-judgmental conversation. I can't.
Sure. Can I just pause you? I want to pause you right there because it's such an important moment for the story to come. So you began with the listserv. How many people on that listserv?
Like 500. And
so you put yourself out there as a person with mediation background, mm-hmm. and I don't know how you have time to do your classes or eat or sleep, but you're offering yourself to all those people. Say, text me.
Sure.
Right? You gave me your phone number.
Yeah.
So go on.
And I really didn't think anyone was going to text me. I was speaking of time management. I really did it in like 80% to protect my reputation and say nobody can really call you an extremist in any way or like some crazy person if you've just offered to get coffee with them, basically. And yet I got all these text messages from all these people that I didn't know with really curious, open-minded questions. Nobody said anything hateful. I remember one question was, what's the best solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And I was like, wow, I don't know the answer to that question, but maybe there's a need for some sort of hotline where people can ask questions and get responses. and that they'll get a response from a range of perspectives. That's kind of my nature in general. And so it was the idea that I had for this hotline that we could have folks staffing a hotline who, when they get a question, they share a range of perspectives and let the user come to their own conclusion. And that way, kind of preventing people from deciding they're an expert based on that social media post that they saw last week, but also kind of empowering them to think about their own value system in conjunction with the narratives that were being shared and come to a conclusion that makes the most sense for them. And thus started the Hotline for Israel-Palestine, which now has 12 volunteers and has answered hundreds of questions from across the country. And we have some resources up on the website as well, all that really put narratives side by side and encourage people to engage with them.
And it has a great acronym, right? HIP.
HIP, yeah.
But what really strikes me about the story you're telling and your experience is that, the whole country is watching universities blow up from outside the campus, looking into the campus from the outside and seeing all that. And that's happening at Harvard too, obviously, rather dramatically, in fact. And what you're describing is sort of a movement happening now among students. What's really striking to me about the hotline, as you describe it, is that even in that extremely heated moment, it's not you didn't create a forum where people are going to come lobby.
Right.
That wasn't the invitation. It wasn't a forum to say, come and vote and we'll organize politically and make some decision. Rather, it's something like an invitation to come to a place where you can come and you can inquire, and you can learn, and you can ask, and you can become broader, perhaps. Can you just give us a little more flavor about this? So these students were texting in. How many? So how it was you and it was just you alone at first, I gather.
So it was me alone.
How did it start? How did it start to grow? What happened?
Yeah, so I should clarify one thing, which is there actually aren't that many students involved. It's somewhat unfortunate. Originally, I thought it would be really cool if the hotline was staffed by students for students. It is not either of those things. I staff it. There's a couple other student volunteers, but our volunteers ranged in age from like 19 to maybe like 65. And we don't know who our users are because it's anonymous. And that's part of the design, that in a classroom, everybody knows that person who, raises their hand to ask a question and instead makes a very long, convoluted comment that nobody asked for. We figure that will be reduced if people don't feel like they, John, are trying to prove themselves to another person. So we don't actually know who it is that's using it. But with that caveat, basically, I set up this phone number. I decided my cell phone was no longer a sufficient way to run an organization. And so we set up a phone number, and I basically sent a lot of emails to a lot of people. I don't really remember. It just kind of all happened. I used this listserv and that social media and reached out to some of my teachers from high school and reached out to nonprofits, Palestinian nonprofits, Israeli nonprofits, and said, hey, we're doing this thing. What resources can you provide us? How can you help? And we were really lucky to get really great press coverage early on. We were covered in international media, which really helped bring on more volunteers and bring kind of a spotlight to the hotline. And people it's really easy. It's a very low barrier to entry project. You just text a number from your cell phone. You get a response from another human being. It's pretty sweet deal, actually.
And tell us more. So did that lead directly to the IME initiative, or what was the path? What was the pathway there? So
the hotline's kind of chugging along. We're getting questions. We're training the volunteers. Everything's kind of happening. To be clear, I didn't set out to be a social entrepreneur. That was never my life mission. It really happened by accident. First I sent this email, then I got these texts. Then I was like, okay, maybe we could do something with this. And now it's December and two things are happening. The first thing is I'm realizing that the hotline is really great for the people who are like, I have so many questions. Like, let me ask you all my questions. But it's terrible for all the people who are like, I don't have any questions. This is a settled matter. This isn't controversial. I had people on both sides telling me this hotline is promoting violence. And I was like, okay, so if you're both saying that, maybe it's not actually doing that. But I felt like there was this huge swath of people. It's actually not that huge. I remember at the Heterodox conference, actually, there was a presentation, I think, about the campus expression survey that suggested that actually the extreme minorities on the extremes on both sides are like 8%. So really, it wasn't a large swath, but it's a loud swath of people who are saying, dialogue is dangerous and I don't have any questions and engaging with the other perspective is, platforming violence and all these things. And I was like, those are the people that worry me a lot more. The people who are asking questions are already well on their way. You know what I mean? And I wanted to do something to help the people who didn't feel like they had questions or they didn't know how to ask them. That's thing number one that's happening in December in my brain. Second thing that happens is a teacher texts the hotline and tells me all about this controversy that's happening in her classroom and asks if we can meet via phone. So I was like, this is interesting. Sure, I'll get on the phone with you. So we start chatting and she says, you're so cool. And couldn't you come to our classroom and lead a presentation for our students? And I was like, no, absolutely not. That's not, let me introduce you to somebody at Resetting the Table or at, Constructive, some other organization that does this because they're experts. I'm flattered, but I'm not an expert. And she said something which changed the whole game. She said, you are not an expert in the sense that you don't have a PhD and you haven't been doing this for 30 years. But you're an expert in being a college student. You're an expert in mediation, and you're going to connect to our kids in a way that other people won't. And I was like, okay, that's compelling. That's compelling enough for me to lead a presentation about active listening. I active listen in small claims court all the time. I can just adapt some of that training. So I ended up going to Texas to this middle and high school and running 3 days of workshops for their students and teachers around active listening, facilitation, kind of truth in multiple narratives. And the whole time I was thinking two things. Number one, what the heck am I doing here? And who am I to be in front of these kids? And really having like imposter syndrome. And also thinking, this is amazing. I really enjoy this work. I think there's a lot of potential for impact, but I need to do a lot more learning before I ever do anything about it. So that was a turning point in December.
And then the Institute for Multipartisan Education. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So my dad had the foresight when I was starting the hotline that he thought we should incorporate under a name that's more broad, like the Institute for Multipartisan Education, because if I ever decided to do anything besides a hotline for Israel-Palestine, it would be unfortunate to be stuck with the legal name Hotline for Israel-Palestine. So we already actually had the shell 501c3 up and running when I went to Texas to do this program. And so after the program, I said, okay, there's potential here. Let's put it on pause and do two things. One, a landscape analysis. So let's learn what's Heterodox Academy doing, about engagement with students. And what is Bridge USA doing? All the organizations in this space. I made this massive spreadsheet. What are they doing? What are they talking about? What are they not talking about? I talked to as many people as I could and tried to get a sense of like, if we were to launch something, how could we do it without encroaching on other people's expertise? We don't want to, come in as a competitor, but rather see how we can help the field grow. And then also, what is the intellectual foundations of this work? I was really interested in like the science behind curiosity and disagreement. And how can we make sure that when we're talking about things, when we're offering programming, it's not like a floofy, like we should all sit down and be friends. It's like a, science says that curiosity comes in these ways, and here's therefore how our programming addresses curiosity. So from March until August, I worked on those two projects. I brought together a group of interns over the summer to do some of that research. And we came up with this idea, both to continue offering this middle and high school consulting, but to create a college fellowship based on these 4 gaps that we identified in our landscape analysis called the Multipartisan Leaders Training Initiative, or MULTI. Thank you to ChatGPT for the acronym. And so we over the summer, we did that research. We built this handbook and are now planning to pilot that program starting in the fall of next year. That will be a kind of our flagship offering.
So I'm very interested in the leadership training, and we'll do that in a moment. Let me just go back to HIP for a moment.
Sure.
Which I still think is a fabulous acronym. One thing you say on the website for HIP is that education and dialogue are the best ways to counter hate.
Mm.
So education and dialogue as antidotes to hate. And then on the Institute for Multipartisan Education website, the formulation is a little bit different. You talk about curiosity as an antidote to polarization.
Mm.
So with HIP, we have hate as something you want to be dissolving.
Sure.
And you want to be dissolving it using dialogue.
Sure.
And now we have polarization as the thing you want to dissolve, and you see curiosity as, let's say, the solvent,
sure,
or the acid. Can you say a bit more about that, about those two formulations, and how do they relate to one another, or pick the second one and do that one if you prefer? But tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think they're super interrelated. I think around the hotline, what people were really concerned about, especially on campus, there were anti-Semitic incidents and Islamophobic incidents, and hate was kind of the thing everybody was trying to combat. Um, and so we kind of set up a formulation as like, we're an education organization. We're not an advocacy organization. We're not a lobbying organization. We're trying to educate people. And we think that educating people will reduce kind of these interpersonal instances of hate, hopefully. I still believe that education helps fight hate. The reason we formulated the institute differently was thinking about curiosity really as our tool of change. That originally I came up with this slogan, disagree curiously, because I thought it sounded cool and interesting. And people kept saying, well, isn't that an oxymoron? And I kept saying, of course it's not an oxymoron. So it's a great conversation starter. And also, curiosity is not one of those words that's kind of tagged as left or right yet. Whereas, people have their thoughts about what free speech means, or they have their thoughts about what civil discourse means. Curiosity is kind of neutral. It evokes like a butterfly, a kid looking at a butterfly. You know what I mean? And then when we did this research over the summer, it turns out there's a robust literature on curiosity as a neurological, cognitive phenomenon that actually does break down polarization. And so it was like this serendipitous linguistic choice that actually panned out in the scientific research. We said, wow, how can we help build curiosity as a tool to help people not only ask questions when they're willing to change their mind, but also to ask questions when they're still unwilling to change their mind, but they are willing to learn why somebody might disagree with them. That's kind of the purest form of curiosity in my mind, and the type that I think we're lacking on college campuses and that I want to help promote.
If we think about curiosity and what it stands against, perhaps.
Sure.
Let me try one. I'll stand one opponent up against curiosity and see what you think about it. So one opponent of curiosity might be something like solidarity in a political sense.
Mm.
So when we're doing politics, when people are organizing political movements, they want to bring people together. They want to align them. They call for people to stand shoulder to shoulder for a cause. And they don't want to have a whole lot of dissenting individuals kind of like on the edges. They want to like show solidarity. There could be things that they don't agree about, right? But what makes them a group is the fact that they had this agreement, this area of agreement. So solidarity is kind of a claim on people that says, don't ask too many questions. That class you described, that teacher saying in that class, basically a certain level of solidarity had been achieved, she was assuming or claiming in advance. And we don't want that disrupted by the question because we want to focus our commitment. Do you see solidarity as is that the right opponent for curiosity? And if so, are we distinguishing political movements and political ideals and political norms from something like intellectual ones and scholarly ones? Do you see the opposition that way?
It's a really interesting question. I don't think that solidarity and curiosity are mutually exclusive. I'm not sure if I think it's a good counter argument. I think that solidarity has an immense amount of value. I think that's how things get done, is by people in solidarity, marching toward justice. But I think that solidarity, you can have solidarity and intellectual curiosity at the same time. I think, like, for example, the icebreaker question, like, who would you sit down and have a meal with if you could, like anybody alive or dead? I used to answer Eichmann as the person I would sit down with, not because like I'm Jewish, right? Like I have no, sense that Eichmann is going to convince me to Nazi ideology, but I'm really curious about his idea of he was just following orders and therefore he's innocent of moral culpability or even of legal culpability. And I think that's a fascinating idea. And I'm super willing to sit down and have a conversation with him about it, knowing full well my boundary, which is I'm never going to be an anti-Semite. And I think that idea of solidarity and curiosity in conflict is what really challenges the university right now and challenges cultural cohesion as well. This notion that in order to be in solidarity, we can't even ask questions about the other side. I don't think that that's true. I think that we still have to ask questions, but that doesn't have to undermine our commitment to our own cause.
Nice. So in the Eichmann example, then, so you're a committed person with a certain views on these topics, but the curiosity part. So what space is there for curiosity? I'm wondering. it's like it's bounded already, right? You're not by the very example you chose. You're not going to become a Nazi or see the world the way Nazis do. It's impossible for you.
Right.
So is that a certain kind of curiosity? Is that a constrained form of curiosity? What's the fuel that makes curiosity go? Can you just say a little bit more? Like, maybe I should ask it this way: are you serious? Would you actually choose Eichmann? Is that the truth?
I mean, maybe there are better, but I haven't thought about the question in a while. So if you're saying, would I choose Eichmann over anybody else? I'm not sure, but I would sit down with Eichmann. I seriously would. And I think that this is curiosity contrasted with open-mindedness in a sense. I think people talk about open-mindedness as like being open-minded to changing your mind. I think it's possible too, it's a semantic difference to have open-mindedness where you're not willing to change your mind. But I'm talking about a type of curiosity that maybe the boundary is changing your mind, that I think that there's still value in, I can appreciate, to take maybe a slightly less controversial example, I'm pro-choice. I could sit with somebody who's pro-life and understand really deeply why they've come to that conclusion, respect their process and, their experiences, and still not change my mind about abortion. I could say, that's my red line. I won't change my mind, but I've learned something about somebody. I've learned something about the world, about the way that many people see the world. And I think that there's kind of inherent value there. And there's no need to go that next step to change your mind. And this vulnerability that I think people feel, that maybe if they ask a question, they might have to change their mind. We can disabuse people of that if we promote a form of curiosity where you don't actually have to change your mind.
So curiosity can be bounded by some sort of fixed points, but it can also be this sort of free-flowing, almost a wild virtue, in that it's a disruptor of the ordinary. And curiosity has this characteristic of being a transgressor. The boundaries of the status quos, even the status quos of our own creation, are often the subjects of attack. That the curiosity attacks or maybe undermines is the better way to say that. Does that idea of unbounded curiosity, does that interest you? Is that part of this?
I've used the term radical curiosity before. I don't know if I love it, because I think radical is coded like politically as a left-wing term, and we're a non-partisan or multi-partisan organization. I think there's an interesting paradox, though, in curiosity as we're talking about it, right? That I'm saying it's bounded insofar as you don't have to change your mind, but it is unbounded in that you can think whatever you want to think. You can ask whatever question you want to ask. I think in some sense, the hallmark of a free society is that kind of intellectual freedom that can even be expressed to whomever, mostly, wherever, mostly. And so there's an interesting kind of double-edged sword to this idea of curiosity, that we don't have to be afraid of its unboundedness, maybe, because maybe people are afraid it's so unbounded, I might change my mind on a value that I used to define myself, and that feels scary. But it also, so it doesn't have to feel scary. It can be bounded in that way, but that there isn't actually, you can, thinking whatever thought you want to think can be a freeing and exciting experience. Even if you end up, in the same position that you were, you've still gained something.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think of curiosity as being an openness to the possibilities. It sort of starts with wondering about what's there and what might be there. And a lot of creative thinking sort of starts that way. A lot of researchers I know, some of the biggest researchers in our generation, are people who are just deeply curious about the possibilities. Even when even any status quo, some of these sort of curious scholars, for example, any status quo is automatically of interest to them, to think, well, okay, why do they all see it that way? Or if you turn it on its head. And there's a strange thing that we talk about in the Academy about academic freedom, is there's this interesting tension within scholarship between a sort of conservative, we might call conservative values, that is, the disciplinary accomplishments and achievements, or where the cutting edge has sort of moved to in some field. That's one very familiar part of the academy. If you go to get a PhD, you become indoctrinated or inducted into a way of thinking and learn all the status quo positions, so that out there on that frontier, there's the possibility for the strange, the new, the quirky, the heterodox. And the academic freedom at its best kind of works at an intersection between something very conservative and spend years memorizing all this sort of stuff to get there. And then it's and now the weird stuff starts happening on the edge, right? It can't just be any weird idea. scholarship is really about moving a frontier forward. Of course, there can be, in Kuhnian sense, paradigm revolutions, but a lot of the work, a lot of the accomplishments are happening out on that frontier on the edge.
Yeah.
Say more about, if you would tell us more about the training program. What does it mean to have a training program, and what are the objectives of the IME, the Institute for Multipartisan Education?
Yeah, I would describe our kind of unit of change. Michael Brown has this idea of a unit of change, like your single unit of change is a person who has both the skills and the disposition to hear something that they disagree with and respond with a question like why, as opposed to something like you're a terrible person, walking away, shutting them down, etc. And so we try and do that. Our goal to do that in the college space is to create this unique kind of by students, for students, train the trainer program where we're actually empowering student leaders to come up with their own ideas of how curiosity could benefit their organization and then by expansion, their campus, and implement those ideas with our mentorship, us being students running IME, in order to create a culture of curious disagreement on that campus. So it's a 9-month fellowship program. We're going to pilot it in the fall of 2025, like the 2025-2026 school year. And the idea will be that we'll recruit student organizational leaders like the editor of the newspaper, the head of the basketball team, the person in charge of the sorority, and do this kind of weekend-long training that answers 3 questions. Why is it really hard to disagree curiously or engage productively across differences? Why is it important nonetheless? And how can we do it? Those are kind of the 3 pillars of the fellowship. And then we kind of do this boot camp around those ideas. But the whole question that they should be thinking about the whole time is, how can these ideas actually benefit my organization? So the newspaper leader might think, wow, we're not very good at interviewing conservative students. We don't know what questions to ask. We just produce worse work. And so then over the course of the semester, maybe they're like, wow, this idea of interests and positions was really interesting. Let me learn more about that. Design some sort of program to do for the newspaper kids around understanding the interests of our conservative interviewees that will improve the newspaper and still kind of passively inculcate the whole student organization with this value of curious engagement across differences. And then in the second semester, the cohort as a group on each campus will come together and create a capstone project to involve the broader campus community. And the idea is students know their campuses best. Students respond to suggestions from other students maybe better than people who they feel are removed from the campus environment. And by empowering them to create something sustainable and grassroots and exciting to them, that's a shared goal, bringing together people around a shared goal who might not actually care that much about curious disagreement, but they care about the newspaper. And now they're learning these values with regard to the newspaper. And suddenly they're in a conversation, they have this skill they didn't know they had, and they whip it out. And they're like, wow, I'm so good at curious engagement across differences. And we do that yearly, adding more campuses each year, but on the same campus. Then campuses start to get that culture shift where by the 4th year, the freshman who comes into the newspaper will have all of these mentors across all years who have this value of curious disagreement. And that's how we're hoping to create shifts in higher ed.
What I love about this initiative, I mean, partly that it's the fact that it's from students and for students, but that's a reflection of a strategic paradigm that HXA, we talk a lot about here at HXA. And we have campus communities, as you know, professors brought together into community to encourage changes. And the 2 watchwords, we have 2 watchwords for all our campus communities when they begin. And that is think organic and think porous. Organic means be from that place. Don't be like a foreign agent and coming onto a place. Every university has its own biology, its own sort of way of being in the world. And if a change agent is seen as an outsider, then the white blood cells that inhabit the place will come out they'll identify it as a foreign body, and they'll come out to attack it. So organic means to be from the place, and porous means to create programs and experiences that are in principle open to any person on campus. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to be an insider to feel comfortable there. You would feel that it's for you too. Yeah. And does the IME model as you've developed it so far, is it organic and porous? Would you use those terms? I
hope so. I think, organic, certainly. We talk about grassroots, which I think it's very similar. I mean, grassroots and organic are all like gardening terms, I feel like. So there's some sort of kind of synergy there. I think porous, to me, when you said porous, I thought you kind of meant people could come in and out. I was like, once you explained it, I think it makes a lot more sense. So I'm not sure I would use that word. I think what's exciting about our programming is that a lot of the kind of programming out there thus far is like, hey, person, are you interested in having more productive conversations across political lines? Join our organization and we'll help you learn how. Whereas IME is a bit self-selecting for the fellows who apply. You know, maybe they're applying just because they care about the leadership of their student organization, but maybe they're applying because they really believe in our values. But we're still able to reach those people who wouldn't have self-selected in. I'm not sure what the word is. Maybe porous is the word for that. But there's this second tier of engagement that I think we get through this program that's unique.
Yeah, there's another term that's at play with you. It's something like aggregating. It
That's
grows.
Yeah.
Somehow it's growing, right? It
ripples.
because
I think rippling maybe is good.
Yeah. And just tell us a little bit. For the listeners, say a bit more about what do you stood up so far as an organization? What do you have? And is your plan? You're graduating soon this spring, right?
Yeah.
The semester's almost over. Then you're on the fast track to leaving. Do you plan to run the organization next year? Or do you have someone in mind? Or what's the outlook for this organization? It's such a fascinating concept. It's reaching an important audience. Obviously, it has a really subtle strategy that's fascinating. Tell us a bit about what state, how many organs are in the organization so far?
That's a good question. And yeah, so my plan is to run the organization full time after I graduate, which I'm really looking forward to.
Fabulous.
I've built an amazing team. There are 6 of us. We have who are all students or very recent graduates. And then whose kind of expertise in being a student and the kind of the student experience is supplemented by both an advisory board and a board of directors. And then we also have a group of affiliated faculty. So we're trying to create a really robust ecosystem across generations, across expertise to kind of guide this work forward. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the 2 schools that we're piloting the program with. That announcement is coming soon, but we have signed MOUs to pilot this program in the fall. So it's really happening, which we're really excited about. Definitely trying to build up our kind of fundraising capacities and our kind of institutional organizational frameworks. Strategic planning is coming in the spring to redo the strategic plan. But we're making serious headway. So I'm excited about this possibility.
And just if I can just go back a step about curiosity, people. It's easy to say you want to be open-minded. I suppose it's easy to say, be curious, let yourself be curious. Do you think curiosity is natural to us? And is open-minded natural to us? At HXA, we sometimes talk about these practices of scholarship, which involves learning an inherited set of things, as I mentioned before, but then it also crucially doesn't work. If you're just repeating the inherited, you're nothing in academia.
Sure.
Critics are a dime a dozen. But if you can know this stuff and then do something new, something novel and additive, that's where the action is. And we sometimes say that scholarship is an unnatural practice because it's not normal for human beings. Love to know what we're doing. We love to be certain. We love to kind of settle in. There's a lot of us that's partly solidarity, but there's other even deeper human elements that just about just settling into a place so we can navigate the world with some sort of confidence, whereas curiosity seems to dissolve some of that. Do you see scholarship as an unnatural practice? Do you see curiosity as an unnatural practice or open-mindedness?
Really good question. I feel a little unqualified to answer it because my guess is that there's robust, psychological literature about whether or not curiosity is natural, and I have not yet read it. I think I was going to say something about there's an interesting, I keep saying paradox. I think the world is full of paradoxes, and that's why I keep using the word, and I wish we could see more of them. But what I was going to say is we have this desire for belonging, that it makes sense that we have this I think the us versus them is a very natural phenomenon. And maybe that's actually the opponent to curiosity, is an us versus them setup. But I think curiosity has to be natural too, because like 2-year-olds, like walk around saying, why, like
right.
nobody taught them how to do that. A lot of people wish they would stop, but I think that needs to be cultivated. I mean, I think it has to be natural if they're doing it. And, you take kids to science museums and you cultivate their curiosity. And I think that maybe some people are more, their literature suggests that there is state and trait curiosity. And trait being, you're a curious person, and state being you see something that makes you curious. So I think there are multiple layers to what it means to be curious. And I think everybody has the capacity for curiosity. And maybe it's like the competing factor of belonging and curiosity and kind of vulnerability. And these kind of are all working against each other. And I think we could all benefit from focusing a little bit more on the curiosity.
I know some of the literature on curiosity. There's a lot, obviously, and there's one little bit of a paradox or a point of interest, perhaps, with curiosity. That curiosity is sometimes said to have these sort of twin features. On the one hand, and maybe it's paradoxical, curiosity frees us as individuals to do whatever we might possibly do, which means we're divided and we're separated and we're over there asking all our questions, or we're out in the world. But then that experience, that sort of why, which you described, that's common to all of us. Right. So it's a virtue. It's a virtue that divides and separates us precisely because it frees us. And in that freeing of liberation, that's a common human experience. So that's kind of this interesting little twist within curiosity.
That's cool.
We're coming up towards the end of our conversation, and I guess I can't resist, since you're heading into the spring of your senior year very soon. You're working on a thesis, I understand.
I am.
Tell us a word or two about your thesis.
So
have you found time to start it yet, or did you finish it like in one day?
Okay, sure, you got 30 seconds. Tell us about the 100-page work that you've been working on for almost a year. Yeah. My senior thesis is really related. It's about how religious and secular students engage with controversial topics differently on college campuses. So I ran a nationally representative survey over the summer asking folks about, in particular, their behavior around censorship and speech on campus. So a lot of the surveys out there, I think Heterodox included, asks about people's reluctance or fear to kind of speak out about different topics. I'm really interested in the actual behavior. Like, a lot of people can be reluctant, but people can do it anyway, right? So I wanted to know, what are people actually doing, and how does it break down religious and secular? And there's a lot of data limitations that I'm happy to chat about, but broadly speaking, the outcome was it actually looks like religious students on 4 out of the 5 measured axes are more willing to engage across differences proactively and are less likely to punish others for their kind of dissenting perspectives. And so I'm arguing that we need to kind of re-examine the framework of deliberative democracy that's predicated on a public-private divide and leads to consensus, to think more about a model of mutual understanding that's both more inclusive of religious students and also, centers relationships and trust building and can lead to consensus as well when it's necessary.
And that's a great summary of a 100-page dissertation. If it's true that religious students are more open-minded in those ways, do you have a hypothesis for why? Could it be connected to something we were talking about before, about having a sense of what one's boundaries are, kind of knowing in some anchored sense where one's going to be? Is that a hypothesis you'd entertain, or do you describe hypotheses?
I do, and there's a couple. There's a paradoxical hypothesis of what you just said, which is my first idea was, well, maybe religious students are really confident in what they believe. Either they think God told them so, or their tradition tells them so, and so therefore it's a little bit less scary to hear new perspectives because it doesn't feel like they're going to have to change their mind. They're like, I'm right, and therefore I can learn this new thing without it threatening who I am. But there's research on curiosity that suggests that confidence actually makes curiosity harder. That confidence is is challenged by curiosity, that people who are less confident are more curious. So I was speaking with my advisor about this. His name is David Holland, if anybody's familiar with him. He's fantastic. And he suggested that actually, religious people, question their faith all the time, right? We think of them sometimes as really, really confident, but actually a lot of us, I'm religious myself, I've thought about whether God exists like maybe once a month for most of my life, right? So
Right.
if we're always questioning these really fundamental things, maybe we have practice. Religious students have more practice engaging with these really unsettling kind of cognitive dissonance experiences, and that makes us more able to engage in the public square.
Thank you. So, Shira Hoffer, you're a senior at Harvard. You're the founder of the Institute for Multipartisan Education. You're an inspiration. I mean, I like when I met you, I just was fascinated from first contact. I was fascinated by you, and thanks so much for coming on the show today. It's really a pleasure to have you talking with our audience.
It was so great to talk with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Heterodox Out Loud is a nonprofit production of Heterodox Academy. We rely solely on support of listeners like you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow our podcast, leave a rating or a review, and share it with your friends and network. Your support helps us reach more individuals who value diverse perspectives in higher education. If you are in higher education, visit heterodoxacademy.org and join the thousands of professors and students from all around the world who are working to support open inquiry. Until next time, I'm John Tomasi, reminding you that great minds don't always think alike.